All right, thanks very much everybody for joining our session today. Cash is King, a data-driven approach to cash flow forecasting. I'm John Paquette, VP Solutions for TIS's US market. And today we have a really interesting conversation lined up where we'll take you through some of the few key topics in consideration related to your cash flow forecasting process. So we're going to hit a bunch of different topics along the way here. The importance of data in your forecasting process, what to look out for when you're selecting a cash flow forecasting tool, how to measure success in your cash flow forecasting process, and then we'll hit some of the more cutting edge technological topics here, how technologies like AI and machine learning kind of might be able to be introduced into these processes as well. So to help lead us through these points, I'm very excited to have Nicholas Christian, CEO and founder of Cashforce here. Nicholas, welcome very much to this coffee talk, and maybe you can take a few minutes here just to introduce yourself to the audience.
Right. Thanks a lot, John, for inviting me to this coffee talk. I'm really excited to be to be here. My name indeed, Nicholas Christian. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Cashforce. We are a cash flow forecasting and working capital analytics solution, active on a global scale and really helping treasurers to improve their cash flow forecasting process, but also to save and reduce working capital. And how it all started was 8 years ago, where I was working actually for different CFOs in the private equity portfolio space, really very active with the topic of cash and working capital, and then saw different gaps in the market that we then designed a solution for. So very excited to be here, John, for this coffee talk.
Great, yeah. And maybe we could start here just by maybe talking the audience through some of the common issues that a lot of organizations face pertaining to cash flow forecasting. It seems like when you have these surveys come out about how satisfied people are with their cash flow forecasting processes, you always hear forecast accuracy is low, right? Time to create forecast is high, effort involved in that is high. Lack of actionable business insights is very low. So what do you think it is that's really contributing to that?
Yeah, absolutely, John. So it's a very recurring topic if you look at these surveys. Now, accuracy is low. Of course, if you make a forecast, the primary focus of a lot of treasurers is looking at making a projection that hopefully is a good prediction of the future and is as close as possible to that target. That's one of the goals. Now, if you look to the underlying problems of the accuracy is low, you need to think about underlying data sources that you need to get together. You need to consolidate that. That in itself is associated with a lot of volume of data, so large volumes of data. There's, of course, a human process involved to manipulate that data. And the manipulation with ordinary tools, Excel, BI tools, of course, takes some time, but also takes, I guess, knowledge or requires knowledge from the actual person doing that job. So I call it the skill set then required to manipulate that data. And then ultimately, from this data that is the source of your forecast, there's always the fact that you could make errors. You do manual adjustments, suggestions, and you probably want to check a couple of things with other parties around you. So you need to communicate about that. Again, so the data volume, the fact that the skills need to be there to work with the data, but then to communicate about what's inside the data, it all makes it, I guess, not that easy or straightforward to come up with an accurate prediction. On top of course, they call it the volatility that you would be faced from an external point of view. So in terms of accuracy, that's absolutely one of the key aspects to think about in terms of the underlying reasons. And then, of course, when you think about the process of forecasting, people want to make simulations. People want to maybe guide all the data through a workflow. So they want to have approvals, rejections throughout. So that's not that easy to manually do and orchestrate in a company. So, well, quite a lot of, call it, underlying issues behind the sort of inaccuracy and the time issue of taking the fact that it takes a lot of time.
Now, some really good points. I mean, if you think about the cash flow forecasting process, you do have just a lot of data points converging on one solution, right? You have bank data, balance and transaction type information. You have ERP data that's commonly driving short-term cash flow assumptions around payables and receivables. You have your financial reporting systems, right, that probably are contributing to long-range forecasts. And then you have these individual business users that are probably making one-off adjustments to the forecast on the fly. increase your short-term accuracy. So it's a lot to consider there in one solution as you're putting that together. So no surprise, I think, that it's tough to get a high level of accuracy, and then it's also difficult to, if you don't have this kind of data piece figured out, the time to create a forecast probably goes way up, because then you have a portion of your data going into the solution automatically, and a portion that you have to contribute from some sort of outside source, right? So maybe we could just talk about data generally, as it's sort of the fuel of the cash flow forecasting process. And I think that a lot of people know the old phrase, garbage in, garbage out, right? So you need to have the data going in there to actually deliver good insights out of the solution itself. But yeah, I'd love to get your thoughts on just data from a general standpoint.
Absolutely. I think you just mentioned something very interesting, in the sense that you have data from ERP, you have data from your P&L systems, you have data from your potential TMS system. So all of those data come with different volumes, a different form of granularity ultimately. Some of the data will be coming in per month, like a P&L. Some of the data will be potentially be there transactionally, like the invoices that you have on your balance sheet, and or the treasury transactions from your TMS system, the payments that you have sitting ready for your payment system, and then the bank statements, which are again a completely different format. So you have different formats, different granularities, different volumes of data coming together, and then it's like this sauce where you actually need to then make an end product, the cash forecast. And let's say putting the data in the right order, short term, medium term, long term. That's one of the challenges of, let's say, structuring that data so it all falls into the end product. But then thinking about data quality from each of those sources. We all know that our P&L is a projection for example, the next 12 months, but it also is based on a lot of assumptions. When you think about the other extreme, if you're very transactional data within your treasury management system or your ERP system, these are actually booked transactions that have a, call it, if you book them wrongly, let's assume, for example, your ERP, a lot of us would struggle with the fact, like, if I take a balance today, is that actually the correct balance? Has everything been booked so far in terms of AP? And yesterday's bank statements came in, but are they already booked against the ledger? So am I actually taking the right balance? These are just a very 2 or 3 simple questions to actually state, well, my data quality is very important for the ultimate entire exercise, but has to be considered per individual source to come to the ultimate data quality of your entire forecast. And yeah, so these are a few considerations to even start with thinking about data as the fuel, garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah, and I guess the less automated that process is, the more that you're combining multiple different sources, you just compound that data consistency issue, right? So it's sort of, you never know if your automated bank feeds are reporting closing balance, and then you're loading in statements manually, and those have the opening balance, and you're not considering the float, and just sort of, marrying up all these different concepts together to make sure you have good data, that you're starting in the right place, and that you're forecasting correctly. So it's absolutely, it seems like it's absolutely critical point of the cash flow forecasting process. And from that standpoint, I guess, what are some strategies do you think that organizations can employ to kind of aggregate this data together and improve the quality of it? I guess, one is data lake, right? That's a sort of concept that a lot of organizations are thinking about these days. We recently launched a survey, and it was something like, I think 25% of enterprise level organizations were actually thinking about a data lake strategy for 2022, which was interesting. I thought that number was pretty high. But a lot goes into a data lake. Obviously, you need to have the right resources and internally to be able to create that sort of thing, maintain that sort of thing, leverage it internally. You have to think about regulatory issues around, can I store this data? Can I not store this data? There's just a lot of considerations there. So, I mean, yeah, data lake on one side, but are there other approaches, I guess, organizations can use to kind of achieve this frictionless flow of data, throughout their organization?
Yeah, absolutely. So we talked about data and data quality, but as you say, access to data, access to the right data, and getting those formats in the right place together at the right time is critical. And I think, as you described, data lakes, or I call it data, data warehouses or data consolidation points, whatever you actually call it, in a lot of those cases, to start doing a forecast, it's trying to get everything into one place. So we see different strategies indeed. The more mature companies goes to sort of these data lake constructs, But whether you call it a data lake or not, the most important thing is to get it in the right place at the right time with the right observed data quality. And just to give a simple example, if you're internationally located, you have 3 major time zone blocks around the world. Call it, EMEA, US, and APAC. So you need to coordinate that stream of data just time-wise to be getting into the same place. And the other piece is, these data lakes are huge, and you cannot fill the data like fully every day. So you need to kind of work with increments. So as you said, it requires skills, it requires coordination, and these data lake projects take typically a bit of time until they actually are fully put in place. And that's why we see other organizations having more pragmatic solutions. So saying, well, we're going to bring for this particular solution, like a forecast solution, going to bring several sources together, and we're going to, put the, call it, extracts available on the SharePoint, for example, and get the data from there. So there's more like a pragmatic solution as well. But everything involves data lake or SharePoint. Everything involves extracting data, and that's where, let's say, APIs or, let's say, extraction techniques actually come in. How do we get from our ERP source? How do we get the data? Is that through an API? Is that through an extraction protocol? And how are we going to transfer that data? So, and then it's when technology as well come into play.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, yeah, data lake on one side of the equation, but we also hear a lot of organizations basically using best of breed solutions as their data aggregation sources of information, right? That can then, on top of these solutions, leverage APIs to call specific data elements back and forth between applications. Because you're absolutely right. The end goal is pulling in the right data at the right time, right? The right data elements into the forecasting application in the sense that what we're talking about. And I guess you can pull that from a data lake, or you can pull that from, an ERP directly through an API, or a bank aggregation software for balance and transaction reporting through API, just to kind of maintain that same sort of, I guess, cohesiveness of the data and frictionless flow of data. So common strategy, I think that's probably a little bit more accessible to those that are beyond the data lake tier, and definitely something to think about. So it's a great point. And when you talk about APIs, I think about the changing role of cash management, or I guess people's perception of the changing role of cash management. Everything becoming more real time, right? Corporates pushing bank APIs for real time cash visibility. The role of treasuries playing just sort of growing over time, and how they're expected to contribute more strategic insights these days, right? The need for flexibility and adaptability that I think the pandemic really highlighted. When things became so unpredictable, a lot of organizations had to learn to really manage things real time and react in real time to things like receivable slowdown and things like this. So it's really kind of progressing, I guess, the maturity level of what people are expecting in a forecasting solution. And the forecast itself it seems like it's no longer just like this weekly to do. Hey, we'll start on Monday. I hope we get it done by Wednesday. People are doing it much more on demand these days, even kind of updating the forecast throughout the day, really, real time. So I mean, is this something that you guys are seeing as well in the market?
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe 2 interesting facts. I think everyone is seeing in the market that data has to be there more real time at a higher frequency, because the reason is very simple. The questions that are asked about the data are also coming with higher frequencies. Certainly if you look at the pandemic, I think CFO office has only fired questions, and it required answers. And in order to do that effectively, you need sort of the analysis to be done almost real time, or almost very, very fast at least. So you need to get the underlying data also faster. So the pace at which data has to be there is just increasing. And at the same time, we had many discussions about APIs. And then, of course, the question is, does API help, or does that word ultimately help? Now, I think over the 1.5 years, we've seen many solutions now adopting this sort of API first strategy to make sure that through a simple protocol, let's say the one application could talk to another and say, hey, I need this data right now. So, you send it or you give it to me. So pull or push, let's say, requests. And that, I think, has changed the game quite a lot, right, for technologies around, because everyone that's sort of API enabled, API supported, API powered ultimately will be able to in a real-time way send or receive data, small pieces of data, but at least, let's say, in a very quick manner. And I think that's just spot on, because more questions, more required answers, more required data, faster frequency of those. And then APIs are typically a methodology. It's just a purely technological methodology to get to that answer faster. That's how I sort of see it.
Yeah, no, I love that. And, in particular, the questions coming more often from the CFO, just the treasurer is expected to do so much more, which I think is interesting, because a lot of the advancement in technology is very market driven, right? It's the treasurer is asking for this. We need real-time visibility. We need banks to provide APIs and things like that, which is just great. It's progressing the rate at which things are advancing quite a bit, I think. So, and I know we're kind of treading into some technical territory here, so maybe, before we get too technical in this conversation, we bring it back a little bit to the solutions themselves, right? So, keeping in mind all the points that we just discussed here, how do companies navigate all the solutions that are available out there in the market? You have different ways you can go about this: the TMS all-in-one solution, the specialized solution, the in-house built solution, the BI tool running on top of the data lake, right? There's probably a lot of different ways you can go about it, depending on, I guess, your maturity level and your functionality needs. So, interested to get your thoughts on that. And then maybe, do other factors play into this decision as well, such as your company size, the complexity, even the industry maybe that you operate in, right? Is that sort of driving the need in the market too?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting and also broad question, and there are many aspects, I guess, to answering it. So I'll take a stab at it. So I guess when you look to, for example, maturity level, to start with one, today you could have a solution for forecasting. You work with, let's say, an Excel that on a just ad hoc basis you update. There's no real frequency by which you really update the Excel file, and you don't really use any outside data except for a couple of people sending you a couple of small numbers, or small batch of numbers. So that's really call it the low maturity. And then if you go a little bit beyond, you'll say, well, I have an Excel and I'm trying to download things from my ERP system, and I'm trying to get them in there, make manual adjustments, send it to someone else, having another batch of information from another system piled into it. And then you run quickly into, as we described, the sort of challenges and problems. And then you go beyond and say, well, I have a specialized system, or I require a specialized system to at least get this data together. And you go one step further beyond, where you say, my need now is to automate the full process, but as well leverage potential machine learning and AI techniques that I can find useful for my forecasting process. So the maturity for the very low to very high, basically this maturity will be a very defining factor to what you need. The second piece is indeed the size of the organization. So we've seen many times before that, call it an all-in-one TMS solution, wouldn't be particularly a fit for companies that are of a certain size, where they have a small treasury department. They just have a couple of loans, a couple of FX products. Then this gigantic system with a lot of functionality is there. The question is now, do I really need that? Or do I need a specific set of functionalities from best of breed solutions? And will it actually solve my particular challenges? And you could think about, even when you grow, you go, well, is my strategy to have 4 pieces of the puzzle, or have a complete puzzle where there's actually a 5th and 6th piece that I actually will never need? So there is where industry or the nature of the business itself will also play a role. So I guess I'm trying to highlight a couple of at least the defining factors, but you named them, right? Maturity level, size of the company, and industry, or the nature of the business.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Us TIS being more on the payments hub bank aggregation side, we get to hook into a lot of different applications, one of which being a cash flow forecasting solution. So I get to see all sorts of things, So I see a lot of enterprise level organizations that have, just never been super satisfied with solutions out there in the markets, and have built their own TMSs, for instance. But then, who has the in-house IT resources to maintain that and sort of, progress it as technology advances too? So they become somewhat stuck, right? You built your own cash flow forecasting solution, but Now you're going to take advantage of AI and machine learning. Are you going to build that into it? Or even something simpler, the industry moves towards XML formats and you haven't built the solution to be able to digest those. There's just a lot of places where they say, this was the right approach at one point, but maybe not so much now. TMSs as well. We see a lot of organizations that use TMSs and have done just like enormous customizations to these to get their exact needs. And then the same thing, they kind of become stuck in these, this functionality that they've built. So, that's one of the reasons why I like so much these specialized solutions that are coming to market. They offer so much more flexibility. They're focused on one thing. In most cases, they're built by, somebody who really understands the process, like yourself, like who's been in there on the cash flow forecasting and really understood how the market was going to move in that direction. So, point being, there's just so many more choices these days, and there's so much more that it's a good thing for the market.
It's like the depth of the functionality, I guess, is just it's more deep on the specialized solution side. And as we see the market progressing, you see treasurers having specific questions and even more specific questions as the time goes by. So, and they're looking at the market, they see now there are two options, all in one or more specialized. And of course, that's the nature of the beast, I guess. The specialized solutions will be able to answer a lot of more questions. And then it's more like a trade-off, like, what do I choose, right? And will my requirements remain that deep, or will I ask the other party that's an all-in-one to do customizations with probably at the end a message from the all-in-one solution like, hey, we're going to migrate and upgrade, and those customizations just fall off the table again, where the specialized solution will have more sort of repetitive improvement cycles over time, and will just get more deep as you go, and you'll be continuously profiting from those updates. So yeah, it's also the strategy of the vendors, I guess, which sits in the background, which you need to, I guess, evaluate before making that choice.
Yeah, I agree to say it's definitely something to keep in mind when making those decisions. So, maybe trying to marry these two concepts a bit. So we talked a little bit about the data. We talked a little bit about the solution itself. So, say you have the solution in the door now and you're trying to understand, I guess, what type of data you need to get into the solution for it to be effective and really draw out the insights that you're looking to. So can you talk us through maybe a little bit about what that approach looks like?
Well, this is really my favorite part. So, we being confronted with so many types of businesses in the past, and also the way that they describe sort of how the cash flows run through the business, you could almost say that it per industry we kind of have a profile in mind of what the typical cash flows would be. And you have, for example, a retailer on the one hand side, then a real estate company on the other hand side, and they'll have vastly different types of cash flows. And I guess the answer to your question is very simple. So before you start thinking about a forecast, we would always advise think about the ins and the outs of the business and how they are structured. And in terms of call it a retail company, so fashion retailer, do-it-yourself retailer. So at the far end on the cash ends, you have all these stores where cash receipts, credit card payments get in the door and get transformed into cash, of course, taking into account the float, taking into account when that cash actually arrives in the bank account. And on the other side, on the cash outs, of course, think about all the clothes that you need to buy. Think about the clothes that you'll buy. You get invoices, but you also get purchase orders actually to order them in advance. And you have then all the treasury type of payments and the dividends and the intercompany financing. And at the other hand, you have also the salaries and the rent for all of these different stores that you have. So thinking about the actual cash streams and then marrying that actually to the data source, because that's where you'll get the data to forecast. That's sort of really where the secret sauce comes in, or where the magic happens. You think about your business and you say, what type of data elements do I have in the business to actually project each of these cash streams? And that's really when things get really interesting, because then you can quickly model, let's say, how your company is going to effectively use the data to fill the forecast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm assuming, definitely a valuable exercise to go through to understand all those data flows and where those insights are coming from. It's not all that different, I guess, from what we do on the payment side as well. We always tell organizations, hey, do you have a full mapping of all your payment process? And they say, yeah, we know all the way the payments are being done. But then when they really dig into the details, they figure out, we had no idea that we had this legacy ERP that was still producing CSVs that we're uploading into e-banking portals and whatnot. So yeah, so understanding those data flows and really how they ultimately feed into the output is absolutely critical. So love the way you described that. And I think another topic that doesn't get as much attention, but people are always asking about is, how do you measure success along the way in cash flow forecasting? Is it just based on the accuracy of your forecast? Is it based on how much time it takes you to create the forecast, or some sort of, like, I guess, measurable business improvement, that you get as a result of implementing the forecast? And yeah, I guess, what suggestions would you make in terms of, measuring success here?
Yeah, also a what is it, $1 million question, this one. And the answer is, in fact, there's a lot of things to leverage from setting up a cash flow forecasting process, more than just the accuracy gains. And this is, I think, the key takeaway. So first of all, as you mentioned, let's assume you take hours and hours and hours from X amount of people to do the forecast, and then you implement a solution by which you can automate a lot of this time and reduce it really by minutes or by just an hour of X amount of persons, and say, well, we saved a lot of time. Now, typically that will not 100% fulfill your entire business case for adopting such a solution, just the automation by itself. However, by this automation, you'll typically buy time to actually analyze your working capital, see working capital insights and driver analysis. And I'm not talking only about DSOs, DPOs. I'm also talking how customers pay, how your vendors get paid, how payment terms are distributed across the board. And this is where I call it, well, you actually call it the strategic level cash flow forecasting, or taking it to the strategic level. This is these business improvements that you called out. That's actually where, on the basis of the data that you need for cash flow forecasting, there will be so much value, inherent value, from using that data and looking for these business improvements. We got even some cases where I think, in the case where we were looking at Kellogg's, and actually Kellogg's was sort of in the news for that, because they really saved a lot of cash looking purely at their payment term and discount information across the board, looking at these working capital drivers, just purely starting from, oh, we'll do cash flow forecasting in the next few months, but let's take a look first at our data. Now, this pure data exercise ultimately led already to first improvements. And then I would say, after those two, you have the cash forecasting accuracy. If you're X% more accurate, then of course this means you make X% better decisions on cash, borrowing, or investing. But I would really say it's important to look at accuracy gains, but we see that a lot of people focus so much on it that they think it's the only gain, and that's absolutely not true if you look to the pure outcomes, success, and statistics that we've assembled over the years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the great things about cash flow forecasting done right, is that the benefits are pretty much immediate, right? You start to get some better insights into your data, into your business activities, that you can derive into actionable, kind of insights pretty quickly in the process, once you kind of have all these data elements folded into it, which is nice. And I guess just the action of doing it, you probably discover a bit over time what's really important to you, what's really the metric that you can then use to measure the success of the forecast, which is probably part of the journey as well. And I guess from that standpoint, implementations approaches, I guess, for cash flow forecasting, if you are focused on, maybe you're focused on quick wins, right? Maybe you're focused on a particular business line and having quick wins there and achieving more insights, or maybe you're looking at things more long range. But I guess, how would you recommend getting started, or sort of a general approach you can give us some hints on?
Yeah, I think it's a very good and important question to put out here, because, and at this timing also, because when when the audience would have listened to us, like, until now, a lot of them would maybe have in their heads, like, wow, that there's data, there's the complexity of the data quality, like, how am I even going to start and deliver the value? But I think the secret was in the last question, where you can pull it already to the strategic level by just analyzing what sits in the data, and then getting relevant cash and working capital insights to realize quick wins at the start of your process. And I call this the sort of walk, run, fly approach, where you say, well, let's make a very simple forecast based on a data set that we have and that we can adopt and that we can connect to quite quickly. But let's make also time to look at the data and see if there's insight that are relevant for the business. And in any case, a bit like Kellogg's did in 6 weeks' time, they saved millions of cash exactly through that point, connecting to one SAP instance, saying, well, let's first work with that SAP data. Let's see how far we get. We don't promise anyone that it's going to be accurate, the forecast. We're going to improve it over time. And we're going to make sure that we use whatever is in the site, the data, to already, pay the project for itself. Let's say payback, have a payback on the project, but also create buy-in. Because the interesting piece on forecasting is that many different stakeholders have a different way of looking at it. Some look at it from just a pure output, like, hey, what's my cash tomorrow and what will I need to do? And some others will look like, oh, my working capital metrics, are they in line or out of line? And then there are other persons in AP and AR that look totally different to the cash flow forecasting process. And all these stakeholders have a role to play, but they also are anxious to see what the output is, what input they need to deliver. So giving them quick wins, giving, let's say, different of these stakeholders sort of reason to believe that this is a good process, that's the ultimate trick, ultimately, to get everyone on board and then everyone on this train to say, hey, data will, a lot of more data-driven, like the title of this session, like data-driven cash flow forecasting, getting these stakeholders involved through a quick win process, a walk, run, fly. So first start walking, then running, and then flying in terms of the approach. That will just create a lot of more buy-in. We've seen it being really successful if you adopt it in such a way.
Yeah, organizational buy-in, definitely critical, in change management when you're putting any new processes in place. That's great. I think that's great advice. So I mentioned at the beginning of the coffee talk here that we'd hit on some of these, more, I guess, coming to market type technologies, things like artificial intelligence and machine learning. So maybe we'll quickly hit on these too. We launched a survey a little while back about where people saw the best use cases for these technologies. And it was pretty much split between fraud detection and cash flow forecasting. It was kind of like even where people saw the most benefits of these technologies. And you can certainly see that in cash flow forecasting when you're trying to predict, the behavior of your payers, things like that, to kind of more bring a different data element into your forecasting process. So curious to get your thoughts on where this technology can help the most in the cash flow forecasting process, but maybe also, the considerations and the pitfalls to, AI and machine learning that maybe you need to look out for before you really think about fully diving into this type of technology.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think machine learning and AI is just those are words that are so much used right now, and everyone is writing them, and sometimes they don't mean the same thing for different people, but also they're not meant in the same way if they're written on paper. So indeed, it's good to distinguish a couple of things. So when we talk about AI and machine learning, we try to do that in a very specific way for a very specific use case. And I think you alluded to, for example, fraud detection and cash flow forecasting. But within cash flow forecasting, we would identify a couple of ways to, in a great way, use AI and machine learning. So I'll give you two. One is, let's take a look at your historical actuals in certain categories, like your historical sales or your historical purchase in a certain area. And then you extrapolate the data using AI and machine learning with a combination of, call it statistical models, with some neural network models, for example, where you select the best one, where you have back-tested that model, and then you combine a couple of these extrapolation techniques, and ultimately you try to forecast the future just purely based on these historical actuals. Now, I'll tell you the secret here. Sometimes it works, and sometimes it totally does not work. And the reason is just I call it the recurringness, the repeatability of the data. You might find, call it some outliers in the data that you need to filter for. So in this particular use case, there is a bit of trial and error to do before you get actually to a sufficiently positive outcome. Also, don't do this on your entire forecast. We sometimes hear the question from treasurers like, hey, here's my cash balances over time. Can you put an AI algorithm on it that just extrapolates it to the future? And sure, we can. The accuracy, however, is not that great and will not be that great. And let's say because it's based on just purely a simple data set from the past, and you don't let it influence by any of the external factors. So when you go to the second use case, this is the use case where you talked about sort of vendor or customer payment behavior. So for me, that's my favorite one of the two, is because there you can actually say, hey, look, we have 2 years of payments, 3 years of payments, 4 years of payments of the same customers, and a lot of the features of these payments, for example, the amounts, the due dates, the payment terms, but equally if they're blocked invoices, if they had disputes on them, what type of products that the customers were buying. So all of these features, if you put that in sort of what we call a decision tree model, that actually can generate for a new invoice for this customer a predicted outcome payment date. And again, here there's caution required, because for some, the computer or the algorithm will not detect the pattern that is strong enough, and you'll see it because of the back test results, which is simply saying like, hey, how performant is my model? And it will say it's 80% correct, or it's 70% correct. And then you'll have at least an estimation of whatever the payment date is that you get now, how confident can you be? And that's the frustration factor, I guess, for anyone in this field, as a treasurer, but also as anyone in the field, you like it to be right or wrong. But that's or 1 or 0. But that's where you can get it fully right or wrong all the time with AI and ML. There's certain degrees of, I guess, offsets that you need to accept. And you also need to accept that you might have a model that today is performing for the full 100% right, and on one day you'll get it completely wrong because it might have been an outlier. So this is I call it, there's lots of considerations as you called them. Don't trust fully in the black box. Think about the skew that you get of your analysis, and also know that it's all based on data. And if the quality of the data is not right, the outcome probably isn't right either. So yeah, and a lot of more considerations, but these are the top ones.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. I mean, it almost brings it back to the beginning of the chat here. Is it relying on the completeness of data? It's important for AI and machine learning as well, because if you have an incomplete data set, then whatever sort of patterns the software itself is picking up are probably not reflective of your business, right? It's based on a partial data source. So I always wonder about that. Solving for that data piece first. Definitely, if you're gonna look to take advantage of these technologies, even thinking about ways to get data out of historical monolith type applications that maybe aren't built to share it. You got to think about that too, I guess, too, right? So, and then really also thinking about maybe if there's abnormalities in that data, like if you think about the last 2-year period here with the pandemic, a lot of the cash flow activity for a lot of organizations is not reflective of normal patterns. And so how does that introduce itself into the process as well? You need to smooth that out to some extent. I'm really interested in some of these topics around synthetic data, creation of data to kind of fill in the gaps and smooth out the bumpiness of kind of an abnormal data set, so organizations can start to use some of these technologies like AI and machine learning. I think that's promising, and one way technology companies are looking to solve this data challenge in a whole nother way. So, but that's probably a topic for another coffee.
Indeed, a topic in itself. Absolutely. So I guess I wanted to just jot in, let's say, a final thought there. A lot of the times we get the question of how much data do you actually need? And there's maybe like a little secret there. A lot of times the answer would be like, oh, just take 2 years and you're off to a good start. But in fact, it's not really about the number of years. The time is the number of data points. So if you have payroll every month or every 2 times a month, and you take 2 years, you have max 48 data points. So 24, 48 data points. So ultimately, that's not a lot. And don't think that you're just on these 48 data points can apply AI and ML. Like you just do purely statistics and you hope it's right. So I'm just trying to put into perspective the answer of 2 years is enough or 3 years is enough. It's not about that. It's about the number of data points. And I wanted to put that out there because it's a sort of FAQ. We get it all the time.
Yeah, we do all the time too. It's just, people want to know, how do you get started? How do you how do you know if you're heading in the right direction on data? What points do you need? How do you value that data? So definitely good points to bring up here. All right, so maybe we wrap up the conversation here with a real kind of general question, right? So keys to success. If you had to come up with, your top, I guess things that make a cash flow forecasting process successful, and this can be technology, it can be operational, it could be people, whatever it might be. What would you kind of suggest as sort of the top three things to drive success in this process?
Yeah, so I think first of all, my number one, think about the goal of forecasting and don't minimize it to only forecast accuracy. I think as we talked about it, really make it broader, more strategic. Think about the side benefits that ultimately may become even the main benefits of the cash forecasting process as we talked about it, getting value from that data. That's just my very number one. Actually, you don't need to do anything for this number one. You just need to have that mindset or talk with other parties that have gone through the same process. This is my top one sort of recommendation, I guess. The number two is start small, right? So this walk, run, fly. Just start small and understand that from this particular, it can be overwhelming what you can do with data. It's going to be overwhelming where forecasting solutions would like to get you. But I guess starting small, walk, run, fly. Again, it's more like an approach thing. Doesn't need to involve too much of operational work in this one to get it all going. And then I think number three is where we discussed in one of the topics our, call it, approach to the process. Think about your cash flows, think about the business and the ins and outs and how to map them to the right data. I even got like a comment last week of a significant business that said, well, looked onto one of the materials that you spread, and one of the materials basically gave an example of your data cash flows with certain mapped data, call it elements to it, and that was found to be extremely useful. So I would say every business before starting into this exercise can really benefit from that. So that would be my top three.
Oh, great points all the way around. I think also probably great points to end on here for the group. So Nicola, thank you very much. I know I enjoyed this conversation very, very much. So I hope the listeners did as well and got to draw some good insights out of it. So yeah, I appreciate you being on today.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure to talk to you, John. It was really exciting here.
You as well.